And Steve Bannon. Would you join us, Steve? Steve was CEO of President Trump's successful presidential campaign. He's a political strategist, and he's been spending the last few months, if I'm right, Steve, in meeting a series of political leaders across Europe. And so he'll be very interesting to hear about what is happening in Europe, especially as we're in the middle of the European elections. I wonder how far along the road we are on this Game of Thrones. So let's talk first, and I'll ask Steve to answer first, about the country still regarded by many as the world's only superpower, the United States. So, Steve, does Mr. Trump have a strategic game plan to make sure the US stays a superpower?
Well, look, I don't speak for President Trump. I'm not in the administration right now, but I think it's a pretty clear plan about how to. We've had this, what is called the post-war liberal rules-based order that's gone on since World War II. That's essentially, if you look from Northwest Europe to around the Persian Gulf to the South China Sea up to the Northwest Pacific, it's a series of commercial relationships, capital markets, trade arrangements, and an American security guarantee. And I think the basic belief of the American people is that we're not an imperial power. We're a revolutionary power. And we've got into a system by our political elites, our permanent political class, both Wall Street, the corporatist, and the political class down in Washington. We tried to virtually, I think, become an imperial power. And that's the big change of Donald Trump. The deplorables, the working class people in the United States, were not happy with the managed decline our elites were putting the United States through. That's why Donald Trump's president. And I think if you look throughout the world, particularly in this engagement in this economic war with China that they've been running on us for the entire industrial West for 20 years, you're starting to see the reinforcement or kind of a restructuring of this rules-based order around individual nation states in the Westphalian system. And I think this weekend in Europe, by Sunday night, early Monday morning, when the populist nationalist sovereignty movement really starts to take charge, you'll start to see, I think, the very beginning stages from Brexit to Trump's victory to now the beginning of a restructuring for the benefit of working class people and middle class people throughout the world.
Thank you, Steve. But I want to sort of move on to America's relationship with China. This is, at the moment, seen as the big head-to-head. Steve Bannon, you called China the greatest existential threat ever faced by the United States. Can you tell us more about why you think that?
It shouldn't be raising its head today. That's the problem. The problem is that the elites in this world, the capital markets guys from Frankfurt, the City of London, Wall Street, the international corporations, they've been running this scam for 20 years, financing and providing the technology to a radical cadre, the CCP, that's built up this kind of Frankenstein monster that's essentially gutted the working class people throughout the world. Brexit and 2016 are inextricably linked. Why is that? It's a revolt by working class people, particularly in formerly heavily manufacturing countries, that live in a new serfdom, where you have this massive concentration of power, this massive concentration of wealth, and that the middle class and the working class, of which I come from a working class family, have been eviscerated. And there's not a bond of trust, because you shouldn't trust them. They're not trustworthy. This whole revolution that's going on now throughout the world that you're going to see on Sunday night that George Galloway just mentioned, it's working class people in the United States, in places like Ohio and Michigan and Pennsylvania, in places like Italy and France and the United Kingdom and others, that are saying they've had enough, that they understand now, they're starting to understand what goes on. And what shocks me of the mainstream media, of all these organizations and all the money, you know, we've been beating this dead horse of this hoax of this Russian collusion with the Trump organization. For the last 20 years, the most significant story was the radicalization of the Chinese Communist Party to suppress their own people, the noble and decent people of the People's Republic of China, and turn it basically into slave labor for the West so they can make goods for the corporatists at higher margins and sell it back to the unemployed and underemployed in the West. That day is over. What you saw with President Trump and others, we've now engaged in what we understand is an economic war against the industrial democracies, an economic war against working class people. And that war is by the radical cadre of the CCP, by Wall Street, by the City of London, and by the international corporations. And that is over.
Bannon, you've heard a lot of contrary arguments. Just to finish the discussion about China before we move on, do you think Washington would like to lever Moscow and Beijing apart? And China seems to have a global strategy, but I don't see any evidence of a US global strategy.
If you don't see it, then you haven't been paying attention. I want to go back to this for a second. This is the problem. This is why there's a revolt. This whole thing of globalization, the elites use that as a cover. Globalization, this whole thing of the globalized world and globalization was nothing more than to find the cheapest source of labor. They treat it like the second law of thermodynamics, like it's some physical property that can't be undone. That is a lie. This all came about through human agency. The City of London, Wall Street, and the corporations will always look for higher margins, and therefore they will always look for the lowest source of wages. You talk about trust. Here's where the fear is. Fear is not in the world. When I go around working class people, you see them starting to unite. You see this vote. You see it in Italy. You see it in France. You see it in the United Kingdom. You're starting to see it in Germany. You certainly see it in the United States. The fear is in the party of Davos and its political apparatchiks in Brussels and all the happy talk that goes along with them. They sat around and made all the money. The Thucydides trap. Thucydides trap is that you're declining power to the rising power. The industrial democracies of the West are not a declining power. That is a lie. The way we got into this is our elites thought it was too hard to confront a radical cadre, another dictatorship. Just like in the 1930s, the same elites would not confront it. It took working class people to confront it. And who were our allies? Russia and China. Russia and China. The great fascist wars.
Okay, let's...
Hang on one second, please.
Briefly, Steve.
Well, it's just so much happy talk. You know, this is a world revolution going on right now. And you have to see reality of what reality is. And no, I don't think in Washington, President Trump in the West, I think you're starting to see evolved a very thought-through plan. And the United States does not want to be an imperial power. We're not looking for protectorates. Working class people in the United States are looking for allies in the West, in the Judeo-Christian West, in the Middle East, in Central Asia, in China. The greatest ally we're ever going to have is old 100 names, the working class people in China. Thanks.
Let's go to nationalism. Steve Bannon, Donald Trump's lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, said, I think yesterday or the day before, that if you don't love your country, you're kind of weird. He said the challenge to Europe's internationalist consensus was maybe good for debate. What have you been hearing, Steve, over the last few months as you've toured Europe?
Well, I think nationalism is nothing more than a reassertion of the Westphalian system. And the reason nationalism, in this populist nationalist revival we've seen, or this revolt that you've seen starting in Brexit and through Trump and now into the European parliamentary elections, Australia, other places, I'd actually say Modi in India, is that people understand, citizens understand that the highest amount of control they could possibly have is at the nation state level, not at some amorphous, transnational level, where you end up having guys like Juncker and people like Juncker, dictating to you how your life is going to be lived. That's being rejected. That's going to really be rejected on Sunday night. Macron laid out in his Renaissance project the natural, logical conclusion of the United States of Europe, where these nations will become basically administrative units, like states in the United States. That is being rejected by the European people. You see a rise in nationalism, and a rise in nationalism is positive. It's what unites people. It gives citizens the best level of control. In Europe, they're not looking to break up the EU. They're actually looking to have a stronger Europe with a Europe of nations, reporting to a free citizenry. And I think you're going to see a whole era of peace and prosperity start to come as we have more nationalism and more focus on the citizen controlling their politicians, and not these kind of centralized bureaucracies like you have in Brussels and in Washington, D.C.
Steve, I think that saying that this populist movement unites people is absolutely wrong. It's designed, and its strategy is to divide people into us and them. By color, by ethnicity, by background, by language spoken, it's us and them. And we found the same thing in the United States with the campaign that you ran successfully, because of states like Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania.
Why was that? Because we gave working class people the Democratic junta, the Democratic Party junta, the globalist, tied to Wall Street, the Wall Street faction, right? They were your voters and your people that voted for us, just like it was Labour that were the deciding votes in Brexit. Working class people have had a belly full of the lies and the misrepresentations. And now they're actually seeing people that will start to unite and bring jobs back. This is not about ethnicity. This is not about race. That's the cheap smear that's been on it. And here's the beauty of it. People know they're not nativists. They know they're not xenophobes. They know they're not racist. And it's working class people and middle class people that are rejecting that. Sure, that President Trump's going to win, but it's going to be very tough, but winnable. But here's what I like about it. It's going to be fought in Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, Iowa. The upper Midwest, the Rust Belt of the United States, is going to determine the next president of the United States. And so even if President Trump, if one of the Democrats gives him a run for the money, they're going to have to convince working class people that their policies are going to work. And so I think this is going to be a very tough race. I anticipate President Trump is going to win. I actually could see how he could actually win with more electoral votes than last time. But the one difference, and I think this is a very positive difference, the globalist elite of the Hillary Clinton junta, right, has been I hopefully put back, and I think that you're going to see real address. That's how we won last time. We won with Democratic votes. And this time I think it's going to be a real fight for those votes. And I anticipate that President Trump's going to win, but stand by. It's going to be tough. I'd be very cautious, particularly in the One Belt, One Road and other aspects. All China's doing is they're taking the British East India Company model of predatory capitalism and they're running it in reverse. Don't think that any of these projects are for your betterment. They're not. And this is not about the Chinese people. The Chinese people are under the worst suppression in the world of any nation on earth by this radical cadre, the CCP. And this is not about the containment of China. This is not about the Chinese people. This is about a business model of state capitalism financed by the West, technology provided by the West, that's for profit, that's allowed this to happen. That is what Trump, and these are not a few simple things that can happen. This is not a trade war. This is an economic war. They've been running this economic war for 20 years. This deal is a truce. This deal is an armistice. It's not about are they going to buy more soybeans. We already know that's why all the liars on Wall Street that said the stock market was going to implode, the economy was going to implode, all the Democrats, everything's going to happen. Nothing happened on Wall Street. You know why? The Chinese have very few bullets in the chamber. They're looking down an economic shotgun from the United States. We cut them off on technology. We can put ZTE and Huawei out of business in 30 days. 30 days. They're looking down an economic shotgun because the Thucydides trap crowd in the West, in Berlin, in Paris, in London, in Washington, D.C., on Wall Street, they all said the West is in decline. And that is a fundamental lie. And the working class people in Ohio and Midlands, England, and now throughout Europe understand it's a lie, understand it's been a bill of goods sold to them.
Okay.
Unfortunately, the environment in Washington is too toxic to talk about working together with Russia over the long term. But I think that's going to happen as this toxicity starts to decline.
Okay.
And I think they're a natural ally of the Judeo-Christian West.